Thank you for coming today. Welcome to Champion City, first con in Springfield in about 20 years. Been a long time coming. Today we have a panel here going to be discussing independent writing, publishing of comics, and all the pros and cons that come with it. Got a very diverse panel here for you today. Starting with the first chair right here, we've got Dustin Carson. Dustin's from Lancaster, Ohio. He's a contributor and a writer for Wicked Tales Anthology. He's also a contributor writer with Studio Kamikaze. I'm saying that right, not Kamikaze? Kumakaze.
Not
He's
a kamikaze.
Kaze, thank you. A Kumakaze, not Kamikaze. Yeah, you don't want to get those two mixed up. He's also the author of Trio and the author of No Gods. And next to him is Dave. Now let's Arhar, not Har.
Right.
Arhar.
Right.
From the Cleveland area. Right now he's also the author of I always say Faustonians, but it's Faustians.
Faustians.
Faustians and Gothic Romance.
Right. And Frankenstein.
And Frankenstein.
And U.S. Bowl.
And the other three I'm going to miss, but he's going to keep reminding me of. Right next to him, Chad Lambert. Chad's from Hamilton, Ohio. He's just won a very distinct award, the 2009 Viper Talent Search, just recently. Congratulations. He is an author for Killer Revisionist, Return to Point Pleasant, Blood Rain, and Possum at Large. And sitting next to him, Victor Dandridge, and also on Victor's left, Mike Watson, creators for Hot Shot series. Mm-hmm. Now, it's not issue 0 is here today, am I correct? We're coming here with issue 0. Mm-hmm. And I didn't say what area are you guys from?
Where are we from, really? I'm from Columbus, so we just kind of...
Somewhere halfway.
Yeah. 71, that's where we're from.
So, we have a very good representation of town here. I've read all their stuff. And it's a very, very nice little gathering here. So, start with my first question, which is going to go to Chad. Chad, what do you think your definition of independent comics is? Whether it's, metaphorical or the literal definition.
Well, when I first started out, I thought independent comics were anything that didn't involve an editor. But I found out later that editing's good. So my opinion has changed. Now, honestly, independent comics is anything that is a voice, is something that is different than, the stuff that's churned out every week. Whether that be crime comics, whatever. From American Splendor on down. Anything that you produce that's from your heart, that's real, that isn't filtered through a multinational corporation.
Okay. Anybody else on that? Mike?
I think you can also just break that down to independent comics are like college football. Mainstream comics are like the NFL. In college football, those kids are playing with their heart because they want the championship and they're doing whatever it takes.
That's an interesting analogy. I never thought of it like that. And my personal take on it is, as I read your guys' works, I see where Dave's work is more of a thriller, horror type, genre, where Dustin's got more of an epic. When I read New Gods, of a very epic, epic story. Where Victor, I was just talking to Victor earlier, it's very rare for an independent comic you see a very, very straightforward superhero tale. Because a lot of times with independent comics, people think you have to go against the norm, but you show that you can do standard stories and make it work. So,
I call it diversity of self-expression.
You want to patent that. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard that first from Dustin Carson, so any royalties will be going to him. So, Dave, what do you think we're at? What do you think we're at with independent comics? Do you think we're at it always categorizes things by ages.
Right.
Do you think we're on a new age of things?
I'd like to think so. I think there's a lot of really good work out there, and I think we should be. I don't know if, how that's going to translate to people, but I think, if the audience is there and they're actually reading what people are doing, I think, it's real possible that we're on the cusp of something, great.
Do you think there's ever been a golden age for independent comics? Anybody?
I would say, honestly, in the 60s, that was the golden age of independent comics specifically, where people were doing things for the sake of just trying to see what they could actually do.
Are you talking about maybe the underground movement?
Definitely the underground, because I would say that, as independents, our roots definitely come from the underground movement, where it was people wanting to say what they wanted to say, and that's kind of how we approach comics. We are, all fans of the comic form, but we have our own interpretations of these things, of these ideas, and we want to get them out how we want to.
And it's funny how it goes from underground and then 20, 30 years later it's independent for some reason. You know? It's like somehow you became more docile in the process. You know?
I think we had another big spot when, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles did, for as far as bringing the spotlight on indie books. I think when that book hit and exploded, it brought a lot more people into the
It's out in the mainstream. It's out in the
Yeah,
mainstream.
yeah.
That's like a really good example of what the mainstream came. Turtle first came out, they were not all Cowabunga.
No, they're serious.
Right.
These cute little turtles with a Wolverine attitude.
Yeah. If you look at the cartoon now, they're all like totally awesome, colorless, vibrant, things like
And
that.
happy.
Yeah.
And they sold out. You sold out, you turtle, now you're all Disney.
They can sell out one of my ideas for a lot of money. I won't have an issue with that.
So, and here's my next question with Victor saying about the 60s. Growing up, when you were younger, did you embrace?
No,
Isn't it funny how that works out?
Yeah, I didn't start reading comics until I was like 10 years old, and I was a Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld fan. Anything that had a comic book, remotely comic book illustration, I was all about it. It wasn't until I actually got older and more mature in what I thought I could do that I started to look back and see what has come before. Even going as far as to look up comic strips and how does that, how does that engage a comic book, sensibility or mentality of creating a page and things like that. And just trying to really get into the art form of making comics and all the different facets of that. So no, it wasn't until later on that I really got into looking past.
So no interest.
Man, I'm gonna tell you, I thought the longest time, and please don't strike me down, I thought Jack Kirby picked her off for the longest time. I know better now. Please do not strike me. But it took me a while to appreciate what he could do, because it wasn't the dynamic that I had been first introduced.
So did anybody read an independent comic when they were younger?
No, I thought comic books.
Come on, Chad, don't say it just to be the rebel.
No, seriously. When I came up, as a kid at the drugstores and whatever, I always felt this disconnect with the superhero stuff. I mean, like everybody else in the 70s, I read the Star Wars comic, and that was kind of your gateway comic into everything else. But, I remember like in 84, 85, one of these comic book shows at the mall in Columbus somewhere. And, I was digging through this stuff, and Dark Knight Returns had just come out, and I was looking at these comics, and I found a copy of the Ninja Turtles. I think it was like number 6, and it just totally blew my mind. This was black and white. Like, why in the world is this black and white? And I just got hooked on it. And a year later, I'm reading Cerebus, and I'm reading American Splendor, and my mom's wondering why a 16-year-old kid is reading a comic about an angry old Jew in Cleveland who's brushing his teeth. And I was just hooked on that stuff. I mean, I do read superhero, but that stuff always drew me. I was always interested in that stuff.
Dave, you were going to say something?
PC Comics and some of the independent ones from back in the early 80s, when I used to go to the comic shop, I used to pick up on those, but they were a lot more expensive than the Marvel and DC copies. So
Right.
That's right. They were
And it was
adult.
such a hard thing to understand back then.
Yeah.
I have perfect clarity now. It was hard to understand why they were so expensive.
Yeah, and
I
they
know
were
now.
great. Some of them were just so, if you look at them now, I think they were way ahead of their time. I mean, and I still look for them. I try to pick them up.
Oh, yeah.
And I think they were kind of a pretty big influence on what I've been doing now. I mean, if you compare, you can kind of see, the stories are different, but there's similarities maybe in the way that they approached it that I do.
Yeah, it's funny though, most of us as kids, you stick with the standard stuff, and then if you had a parent that collected, you're like, oh, who reads this stuff? And then next day as you get older, I knew what my parents were talking about now. So Dustin, I know this has probably been asked with you dozens of times. Pros and cons of being an independent writer.
The cons, now I've only been exhibiting for a year now, but the major con is just simple financial cash. That's the con of it. I mean, if you're going to do an indie book, you better try and get as big a stake together as you can, because just simply buying your table at a show, that's the con. That's about it. I mean, we just have a passion for this. And the pros are sitting in on a panel and talking about the pros.
Well, I mean,